I pulled into the driveway of the banquet hall just as the sun slipped below the horizon. Sarasota in December doesn't give you snow or frosted windows like you see in Christmas movies, but the palms outside were wrapped in strings of white lights, and it gave the illusion of winter festivity. Valet attendants in pressed jackets moved quickly between polished cars, opening doors with bright smiles. I rolled down my window, handed over my keys, and stepped out, smoothing the front of my dress with a hand that shook more than I wanted to admit. The smell of roasted meats and garlic bread drifted from the entrance, mixed with faint perfume from the line of women stepping ahead of me. Their laughter was high and familiar, reminding me of how foreign my own family could feel to me, even though I shared their blood. A young man at the door tipped his cap. "Evening, ma'am. Welcome." His warmth caught me off guard, and I smiled back, whispering a thank you. Funny, I thought, how strangers could make you feel seen, while those closest could make you invisible. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and tables dressed in white linens. Waiters in black ties carried trays of champagne. The hum of 300 voices echoed against high ceilings, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. For a moment, I stood in the entryway, eyes sweeping across the decorated hall, my chest tightening. I already knew tonight would not be easy. The polished room, the carefully arranged tables, the stage where my parents would no doubt stand and deliver their speeches. It all felt like a set built for a play I had no part in. I inhaled deeply and walked forward, clutching the small envelope in my purse like it was armor. I moved toward the tables, looking for my name card. Each table gleamed with candles and centerpieces of red poinsettias. Names were printed in elegant script, each card tucked neatly into a silver holder. My sister Rowena and her husband had seats right near the stage, their children placed beside them like little trophies. Odessa, my older brother, sat with colleagues from his company, close enough to beam at our parents while they spoke. My eyes darted table to table, but my name was nowhere near the front. Finally, at the farthest edge of the room, near the swinging doors where servers hustled in and out balancing trays, I spotted it. Eschling. My card sat beside a seat pressed against the wall, as if I had been added last minute, squeezed into the layout as an afterthought. I forced a smile at the waiter who brushed past, muttering to myself, "Of course." As I settled into the chair, a man at the table looked at me curiously. "Are you family?" he asked, his voice polite but puzzled. "Or just a +1?" The words stung, though he didn't mean harm. I let out a small laugh to cover the blow. "Family," I answered softly, though sometimes I feel like the latter. He nodded and turned back to his wife, leaving me with the echo of my own words. In their eyes, I was never meant to sit at the center. They had built a hierarchy long ago, and my place had been decided before I could even argue. The seating chart said it all more clearly than my mother's cutting remarks ever could. A mistake, maybe to the casual observer, but I knew better. It was a message, delivered with quiet precision, that my voice wasn't worth hearing from the front. The sound of clinking glass drew my gaze to the stage. My parents, Alethea and Robert, stood together at the microphone. My mother glowed in a red dress, pearls catching the chandelier's light. My father stood just behind her, nodding like a shadow. "Welcome," my mother began, her voice clear and commanding. "We are so honored to have you join us tonight as we celebrate family." Applause spread across the room. I clapped politely, my palms cold. She began introducing each of her children. "Our son, Odessa," she said with pride, "a successful businessman who has carried on the family legacy with honor." Applause burst again, stronger this time. "And Rowena," she continued, turning toward my sister, who smiled like she was used to spotlights. "A devoted wife, a mother of 3, and truly the perfect daughter any parent could hope for." Guests clapped, some even whistled, while Rowena beamed and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then my mother's gaze flicked briefly to me at the back of the room. Her smile tightened. "And our youngest, she's still figuring things out." The audience chuckled softly. A few nodded as if they understood the phrase, as if they'd said it themselves about someone at their own table. I sat frozen, heat crawling up my neck. Still figuring things out. The words hung in the air, dressed as casual, but heavy with the weight of dismissal. The idiom, often used by Americans as a kind way to excuse someone's wandering, had been twisted into an insult. I sipped from the water glass in front of me, holding my face neutral. Inside, the bitterness coiled. For decades, this had been the script. Praise for them, patience for me. They dressed it as love, as humor. But each line was meant to remind me of where I stood. Always behind, always not quite enough. I caught Odessa's smirk from across the hall, and Rowena's indulgent chuckle, the kind that said she was used to being untouchable. My stomach tightened, but I kept my eyes on the table, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. My mind drifted, unbidden, to moments that had built to this night. Birthday parties where my achievements were skipped over to gush about Odessa's newest promotion. School events where Rowena's cupcakes were praised while my art sat unnoticed. Those weren't memories of accidents, they were rehearsals for tonight's stage. I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt's words I'd clung to like a mantra. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I whispered them in my head now, as though they could shield me. But the sting in my chest betrayed me. Knowing the wisdom didn't stop the humiliation from settling into my bones. Polite clapping filled the room again. Some guests glanced back at me briefly, eyes filled with discomfort, then quickly turned away. No one defended me. No one contradicted her. Silence in the crowd was louder than applause. I forced myself to sit taller. If this was the way they began the evening, casual erasure disguised as charm, then I could only wonder how much sharper the next strike would be once the wine flowed and the speeches loosened. Tonight wasn't going to stop at subtle insults. Tonight, they were preparing for something bigger, something I would no longer swallow in silence. The applause that followed my mother's introduction still lingered as she and my father remained at the podium, framed in the golden glow of the chandeliers. The laughter had already died down, but the sting of her words, still finding her way, clung to me like a stain I couldn't scrub off. The hall quieted again, 300 faces angled forward, waiting for the next piece of the performance. My mother leaned closer to the microphone. "Our son, Odessa," she announced with dramatic flourish, "a man of vision, a businessman who continues to carry the Wilson legacy with dignity." The crowd clapped, some rising slightly in their seats to show respect. I watched Odessa nod confidently, his hand resting on the shoulder of a colleague at his table. He smiled like a man accustomed to applause. "And Rowena," my mother continued, her smile broadening. "A devoted mother, a gracious hostess, and a daughter who has always put family first." Rowena's cheeks glowed as the audience clapped again, louder this time. Her husband patted her hand, and she nodded graciously as though she were accepting an award. Then came the pause, that shift in tone I'd heard my entire life. My mother's voice flattened, just slightly. "And our youngest," she said, glancing toward me at the edge of the room. "She's still finding her way." The chuckles that rippled across the hall weren't cruel in themselves, but they carried the same weight as a hammer blow. People nodded politely, clapped softly, and quickly turned their attention back to the stage. That single sentence had erased years of my work, my struggles, my choices. In less than 5 words, she had reduced me to a wandering child. I pressed my fingers against the base of my glass to steady my hand. Still finding my way, I thought bitterly. It wasn't just a harmless remark. In American households, that phrase was used to excuse someone drifting without purpose. Tonight, it was weaponized. The applause carried on, and my parents basked in the glow. No one contradicted them. No one said, "That's not fair." The silence was deafening. The speeches wound down, but the performance wasn't finished. As waiters dimmed the lights slightly, a large screen at the front of the hall flickered to life. Soft piano music played as a slideshow began, a so-called journey through family history. First appeared Odessa's college graduation photos, his cap tossed in the air, arms around proud classmates. The screen shifted to Rowena's wedding day, her dress glistening in the Florida sun, my parents beaming at her side. Then came birthday parties, anniversaries, vacations, image after image of triumph and joy. When I finally appeared, it was in fragments. A group photo from a beach trip where only the back of my head showed. A Christmas picture where I had been cropped half out of the frame, my smile cut away by the edge. Another, where my siblings filled the center and I hovered at the corner, blurry and insignificant. Guests murmured quietly. I caught a woman at the next table lean toward her husband and whisper, "That's strange, isn't it?" But no one said more. They simply let the slideshow run on, as though my absence was natural. I shifted in my seat, my throat dry. In their album, I'm not a daughter, I'm a shadow. The thought settled heavily. Photographs were proof of what mattered, and apparently, I didn't. As the screen cycled through vacations, I remembered vividly the scent of salt air, the laughter of waves. My own place in them was erased. They had crafted a narrative where my life was peripheral, not central. The music swelled as the slideshow ended. Applause came again, polite and measured, though it seemed aimed more at the production than at the truth. The clapping faded, but inside me the noise only grew louder. I recalled a phrase I'd once overheard at a church gathering: "You're only as strong as your family name." That saying had haunted me tonight, because what if your family name was used to bury you instead of lift you? Oprah's voice rang in my memory, words I had scribbled into a notebook once. "You define your own life. Don't let other people write your script." Tonight, my parents were writing my script in bold letters, right in front of 300 witnesses. They made sure I was cast as the daughter who had never found her path, the girl too unsteady to earn a sentence of pride. I sat stiffly, my eyes fixed on the now dark screen. Part of me wanted to stand, to challenge them, to shout that their version wasn't mine. But I stayed still, my nails pressing crescents into my palm. Speaking now would only fuel their narrative, the youngest daughter making a scene. Instead, I waited. Waiting had always been my habit. Endure the shame, swallow the bitterness, and let the night pass. But something different simmered beneath my chest tonight. Their actions were not carelessness, they were patterns, deliberate threads stitched over decades. Each omission, each dismissal was intentional. Across the hall, Odessa basked in the glow of his title. Rowena leaned against her husband's shoulder, smiling at the adoration. And me? I sat at the edge, dressed like the others, but treated like an extra. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about being rewritten, again and again, into someone else's narrative of who I was. The shame burned hot, but so did the resolve. Tonight, I wasn't going to remain a silent witness to my own erasure. I scanned the room as the guests returned to eating and chatting. Their faces reflected acceptance. Nods, laughter, glasses raised. They had swallowed the story my parents fed them without question. A few people shot me uncomfortable glances, but none dared to speak out. Social politeness was stronger than truth here. I leaned back, listening to the clink of forks and glasses, the hum of chatter resuming. Respect isn't demanded by age or title, I told myself. It is earned. And tonight, they lost mine. I thought of how, in American families, reputation often outweighed reality. As long as the outside world believed the picture, the truth could be buried at home. That had been their tactic for years: smile for the crowd, silence the inconvenient voice. But my patience thinned with every passing second. My pulse beat faster as if my body already knew this night would not end quietly. They thought they had written the final draft of my story in front of an audience. They didn't realize I was holding the pen now. I pressed my palms together, steadying my breath. They think it's strategy, and maybe it is, but I've played along long enough. And I felt it then, deep and certain. The storm had only just begun. The music from the slideshow was still echoing faintly in my ears when the lights returned to their full brightness. Polite applause rang across the room, but I could barely hear it. My eyes had locked on one particular image that had flickered across the screen. A family portrait where my shoulder was visible, but my face had been cropped out. It wasn't the first time I'd been erased. Tonight only confirmed what I had known all along. This wasn't an accident. This was a tradition. The noise of the hall faded as I stared at the empty water glass in front of me. Conversation buzzed all around, forks tapping plates, laughter weaving through the tables. But in my head, a door opened, and I stepped backward in time. My seat at the edge of the banquet disappeared, and suddenly I was a girl again, standing in my childhood living room in Wisconsin, facing a camera that had always seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Stand to the side, Ashling." "There isn't enough room in the center," my mother's voice had commanded, sharp and unquestionable. I remembered the Christmas tree behind us, its lights blinking unevenly because one strand had burned out. Odessa stood proudly in front of the tallest branch, holding a football, while Rowena beamed, clutching the dollhouse she had begged for. My father adjusted the camera, and my mother fussed over Rowena's dress. I edged closer, trying to fit into the shot, but Odessa blocked me with his elbow. "Don't cover me," he muttered. "Don't block the important ones." The click of the camera froze us in time. In the printed picture, Odessa's grin was wide, Rowena's bow sat perfectly, and me, I was half a person, shoulder in frame, face obscured by shadow. It hurt more than the elbow. Photos are proof of what matters. Mine always told the wrong story. I remembered flipping through albums years later, searching for myself. I was never centered, never framed. Always pushed to the corner, blurred, or missing altogether. "Pictures are the story we leave behind," an old teacher once told us. Looking back, I realized my family had already decided my story wasn't worth telling. That was just the beginning. The omissions grew with me. At my high school graduation, Odessa's banner flew across the front lawn. "Congratulations, Odessa," in bold blue letters. For Rowena, balloons in silver and gold framed the porch when she graduated a year later. For me, there was no banner, no balloons, just my grandmother whispering, "I didn't even know she was graduating today," as she sat on the bleachers. At church, programs for holiday services listed the Wilson family, Robert, Alethea, Odessa, Rowena. My name was either misspelled or missing. I remembered sitting in the pew, tracing my finger over the print, fighting the urge to laugh out loud at the irony. You can't misplace someone's name by mistake that many times. And at my cousin's wedding, the family toast went on and on. "Our children, Odessa and Rowena, the pride of our hearts," my uncle declared. I was there, in a pale green dress, sitting 2 seats away. No one raised a glass for me. No one said my name. Each omission seemed small, forgivable in isolation. But stacked together, they formed a wall that told me I didn't count, that my existence was negotiable, that if I disappeared tomorrow, the family story would go on unchanged. Maya Angelou's words rang in my memory. "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And what my family made me feel, over and over, was invisible. I could hear my own voice inside me whispering bitterly, "They made me a ghost before I ever had the chance to live." Applause broke again in the banquet hall as the slideshow ended. I blinked, returning to the present. Odessa stood, shaking hands with a guest. Rowena leaned into her husband's shoulder, smiling warmly at the compliments pouring in. My parents sat at the head table, looking smug and satisfied, as though they had crafted the perfect narrative for the world to admire. And me, I was once again at the edge, as though the years had folded neatly into this night. Nothing had changed. The banquet, the photos, the introductions. It wasn't negligence. It was a ritual they had perfected. Erase me. Praise them. Repeat. I studied my parents' expressions. My mother's eyes shone with pride, not for the family as a whole, but for the image she had curated. My father clapped slowly, his approval subdued but present, like always. He never fought her choices, never corrected her narratives. He just went along. My siblings looked comfortable in the spotlight, basking in it, smiling as if they had earned every syllable of praise. They had accepted the roles they were handed, the golden son, the perfect daughter. And me? I felt the bitterness rise, no longer sharp, but steady, like a quiet storm rolling in from the Gulf. I wasn't just hurt. I was done being silent. I pressed my palms against the table, breathing slowly. Tonight wasn't just another gathering to survive. Tonight was a turning point. If their spotlight erased me again, I was ready to carve my own light into the darkness they had built. The buzz of conversation after the slideshow carried on as waiters began clearing plates and readying the tables for the next portion of the evening. I sat stiff, trying to steady my breathing, when the master of ceremonies announced, "And now, a moment we've all been waiting for, the presentation of gifts." Guests leaned forward in anticipation. My mother always loved a show, and tonight she had orchestrated every detail. Wrapped boxes and neat envelopes were stacked neatly on a decorated table near the stage. My heart quickened as I saw my own contribution among them. A small velvet box wrapped carefully in cream-colored paper with a burgundy ribbon. I had spent weeks finding it. A vintage necklace, a delicate chain holding a pendant once designed in Ireland, where my grandmother had been born. It wasn't just jewelry. It was heritage, a reminder of where we came from, meant for my mother to hold close. When my father handed her the box, I leaned forward slightly. This was my moment, a chance for once to give something of myself that might break through the armor of dismissal. She untied the ribbon with a dramatic flourish, lifted the necklace, and gasped loudly enough for the room to hush. "Oh, Rowena," she exclaimed, her smile wide as she held the pendant up to the light. "You always know my taste. This is exquisite." Polite clapping filled the room. Guests turned toward my sister, nodding approvingly. Rowena gave a little wave, half protesting but not enough to correct the lie. "Well, thank you, Mother," she said lightly, as if it were true. My chest tightened, heat rising to my face. It was my gift, my thought, my love wrapped in that box, and in seconds it had been stolen, repurposed as another feather in Rowena's cap. Around me, people whispered, "She really is thoughtful, isn't she?" reinforcing the illusion. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my palms. Anger boiled, but I swallowed it, studying the room carefully. They weren't just erasing me, they were gifting away the pieces of me as if they belonged to someone else. As laughter and chatter resumed, I sank back into my chair, replaying the days I had searched for that necklace. I had combed through antique stores, spoken with jewelers, and wrapped it myself with care, tucking a handwritten note inside that simply read, "For the woman who taught me to stand tall, even when the wind blew hard." That note hadn't been read. That gift hadn't been mine anymore. Even my love, I thought bitterly, was easier for them to hand to another when it carried my name. A woman seated near me leaned closer and whispered warmly, "That was sweet of your sister. Such a perfect choice for your mother." I turned to her, lips tightening into a polite smile. "Yes," I said quietly, though every syllable tasted like ash. The woman nodded, content, and returned to her dessert. She didn't know she had just reinforced the erasure I had lived with my entire life. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Gifts are tokens of acknowledgement, a way of saying, "I see you. I value what you give." But here, in front of 300 people, my offering had been denied, stripped from me, and reassigned to the sister who already had everything. Bitterness rose so sharply that I had to sip my water to keep my throat from burning. I was close to breaking, closer than I had ever been. Later, as guests mingled and the band began to play light jazz, I stood near the edge of the hall, trying to disappear into the movement of bodies. That was when a distant cousin approached, his expression polite but casual. "So," he said, holding a glass of wine, "are you a family friend? I don't think I caught your last name." For a moment I froze. Did he really not know me? "No," I answered evenly, though the sting lanced through my chest. "I'm their daughter." His eyes widened. "Oh, my apologies. Well, I didn't see you in the slideshow much, and I thought—" His voice trailed off. "It's all right," I replied, forcing calm. My tone was smooth, but inside, something cracked. He shuffled awkwardly, muttered another apology, and excused himself, but the damage was already carved deep. To be mistaken as a guest at my own family's celebration, it was more than an insult. It was confirmation that even extended relatives had absorbed the story my parents had crafted. I wasn't central enough to be remembered. The humiliation layered upon the dismissal of my gift. I was fading in their narrative, becoming not only a shadow, but an outsider. I found a quiet corner near the back, away from the noise of clinking glasses and laughter. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around the stem of a half-finished glass of wine. They didn't just take my seat, I whispered to myself, words forming unbidden, or my place in their photos, or my name in their speeches. Tonight, they took my love and gave it away. I thought of the necklace, gleaming under the chandeliers on my mother's neck, and how the credit had already been misplaced, how the story would be retold tomorrow. Rowena found the perfect gift, once again. Family should be a refuge, a place where you're sheltered. But for me, it had always been a battlefield, one where my silence was survival, but survival that cost me pieces of myself. I set down the glass and straightened, a cold clarity washing through me. If I remained quiet tonight, I would surrender entirely. If the next blow came, I knew I could not let it pass unanswered. My patience was at its edge, trembling like a glass about to shatter. And I could feel it. Tonight, that shatter was coming. The clinking of forks against china quieted as my mother rose from her seat once more, my father dutifully joining her at the microphone. I could feel the shift in the room, the collective anticipation of 300 guests ready to hear another polished speech. My mother's voice, sharp and steady, filled the hall. "Family is our foundation," she began, her eyes sweeping the audience like a conductor surveying an orchestra. "Through trials, through storms, we have always leaned on each other. And tonight, I want to acknowledge the one who has carried us through so many difficult times." Her hand gestured grandly toward Odessa. "Our son has been the rock of this family. His sacrifices, his dedication, his tireless work have kept us standing tall." The crowd erupted in applause. Some guests even rose to their feet, nodding, clapping, admiring the man who sat smugly near the stage. Odessa lifted his glass slightly in acknowledgement, offering the modest smile of someone used to being celebrated. "And we are so proud of him," my mother continued. "His success reflects not only his strength, but the strength of our name." I sat frozen, bile rising in my throat. Rock of this family. My mind flipped through memory after memory, late-night calls from my father when bills were overdue, checks I had written to cover roof repairs, tuition for Rowena's children that I quietly shouldered. I had carried them, but Odessa wore the crown. I wanted to stand, to say it outright. I was the one who paid those bills. I was the one who sacrificed. But instead, I clenched my jaw, forcing myself into stillness while betrayal cut sharper than any knife. As the speeches ended, the mingling began again. Guests drifted toward Odessa, clapping him on the back, offering congratulations. "You really saved them," one uncle said, shaking his hand firmly. "We're lucky to have someone like you in the family," another added with admiration. Odessa accepted each word with a rehearsed nod, his eyes darting once in my direction, but quickly looking away. His smirk lingered, not of guilt, but of triumph, like he had won a competition I hadn't even entered. I stood near the dessert table, watching, listening, the voices overlapping. My sacrifices had been buried under his false heroism. Inside, a bitter thought surfaced. Credit is cheap when the truth is expensive. They were handing him the crown built from my quiet labor, my invisible support. The unfairness burned, each congratulation he received echoing louder in my head. I recalled every check, every sacrifice hidden under his name. It wasn't just about money, it was about worth. And tonight, mine had been stolen again. As servers moved briskly, setting out trays of cakes and fruit, I retreated toward my table. Before I could sit, my mother approached, her tone brisk. "Aisling, could you make sure the dessert trays are evenly spread? Some guests at the back haven't been served yet." I blinked at her. "You want me to check the trays?" "Yes," she said, already turning toward another group. "And make sure everyone's comfortable." I stood there, stunned, but before I could reply, a guest tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me, miss, could we get more water at our table?" For a moment, I didn't answer. My throat tightened, rage threatening to burst. But then I forced a stiff smile. "Of course," I said, reaching for a pitcher. I walked it over, filling glasses while the guests thanked me politely. They thought I was part of the staff, another server moving between tables. I set the pitcher down with shaking hands. I wasn't just erased tonight, I thought bitterly. I was demoted, turned into help at my own family's celebration. The humiliation twisted into something sharper. Not only had they stolen my seat, my recognition, my love, they had now stripped away even the dignity of being acknowledged as family. I returned to my chair, sitting heavily. My pulse thundered in my ears as the music swelled around me. Laughter filled the hall, conversations hummed, and the lie my parents had spun held firm among the crowd. Every lie I swallowed built this banquet tonight, I whispered under my breath. Every silence I kept gave them this stage. Around me, the narrative continued seamlessly. Guests toasted Odessa, celebrated Rowena, praised my parents for their legacy. Not one questioned the imbalance. I scanned the faces, smiling, clapping, nodding. They believed it all. They accepted the story because it was easier than asking questions. My invisibility had become the truth they all agreed upon. But inside me, something shifted. My silence had been the cement of this illusion, and tonight I felt the cracks forming. My patience, stretched thin for decades, frayed at the edges. They had crowned my brother king tonight, giving him the glory that was never his. But I knew, before this evening ended, I would reclaim my truth. Waiters glided between the tables with practiced ease, refilling wine glasses and laying down the final course. The chatter softened as crystal stems clinked gently against porcelain plates. I watched the room settle into an anticipatory hush, and I knew what was coming. My parents rose again from their seats, my mother adjusting the microphone as if she were about to deliver a sermon. My father stood slightly behind her, nodding with quiet approval, his role always to echo her authority. The spotlight returned to the head table, bathing my mother in warm gold. She raised her glass slowly, a smile spreading across her face like a mask that had been rehearsed for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm yet commanding, "tonight is not only a celebration of togetherness, but a moment to honor what makes our family strong." A ripple of admiration coursed through the guests. Heads turned toward her, glasses lifted in anticipation of her words. My chest tightened, dread mingling with a small sliver of curiosity. What will they say this time? She spoke with ease, practiced lines flowing like she had memorized them from a script. "Our son Odessa has always been our strength. Through every storm, he has carried us, stood steady, and built a future worthy of our family's name." Applause broke instantly, loud and unhesitant. Odessa smiled, raising his glass modestly as if reluctant to receive the attention, though his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "And Rowena," my mother continued, turning toward my sister, "a devoted mother and wife who has shown us all what grace and family truly mean." Again, applause erupted, even whistles this time. Rowena beamed, clasping her husband's hand and bowing her head as though she were humbled. Then came the pause, the shift. My mother's smile faltered into something tighter, colder. She lifted her glass higher and said, "And our youngest? Well, she contributes nothing, but we love her anyway." The words sliced through the air sharper than any blade. Scattered laughter rolled across the hall. Some guests chuckled nervously, others looked down, unsure how to respond. A few exchanged awkward glances but clapped politely all the same, as though compelled by the rhythm of the toast. Heat flooded my cheeks. My fingers froze around the stem of my glass, holding steady though every nerve screamed. Inside, I repeated to myself, "Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't let them see it land." They used love as a dagger, I thought bitterly, disguised as humor. The humiliation was public, inescapable. 300 eyes had watched my erasure, and not one challenged it. I forced a small sip of wine, my face calm, but my stomach twisted. The taste turned sour instantly, bitterness coating my tongue. Before the room had time to breathe, my father added his own blow, his tone light, joking. "At least she keeps us entertained with her experiments." Laughter grew louder this time, free and rolling, as though his remark had given permission for cruelty. Glasses clinked, wine spilled in merriment, and the hall filled with the echo of my name distorted into mockery. I heard a guest at a nearby table murmur, "Well, every family has one who strays off track." His companion nodded knowingly, as if I were an inevitable archetype in the family story. The laughter branded me, each sound like a scar pressed into memory. I stared at the tablecloth, my knuckles white around the stem of my glass. My heart raced, anger boiling beneath the surface. Still, I didn't move, not yet. Inside, the storm swelled. The sound of laughter stretched thin until it became unbearable. I scanned the room slowly, my eyes passing over faces one by one. Some beamed smugly, satisfied with the show. Others looked indifferent, unwilling to challenge the narrative. A few, just a few, looked at me with quiet sympathy, their eyes speaking what their mouths dared not. I inhaled deeply, the hum of the hall buzzing in my ears. Respect isn't given in this family. It must be seized. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words surfaced in my mind. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I repeated them like armor. Silence tonight would kill me. Not my body, but something deeper, my spirit, my voice. I knew then that I couldn't leave this hall with their words hanging as the final truth. If I swallowed this toast as I had swallowed every insult before, I would vanish, absorbed into the shadows they had written for me. I looked at my glass, the liquid trembling with my grip. They thought this toast was the final word, but I had my own glass to raise. I rose from my chair, and the napkin slipped from my lap to the floor with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than the laughter filling the room seconds before. The sound carried, and the air shifted. Conversations hushed, chuckles died out, and 300 faces turned toward me at once. For a breath, no one moved. Glasses hovered mid-air, forks froze halfway to mouths. I stood straight, steadying my breath, and felt the weight of every eye pressing on me. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out clearly. "You've heard their version of the truth," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Maybe it's time you heard mine." Gasps rustled through the hall. A few people murmured to one another. Some leaned forward, eager, while others frowned, unsure. I knew what they expected, that I would falter, apologize, sit back down. But standing there, with all of them watching, I realized this was the most dangerous move I'd ever made, and the only one I had left. "Aisling!" My mother's voice sliced through mine, sharp as glass. She didn't shout, but the authority in her tone carried like thunder. "Sit down! You're embarrassing us!" The hall stiffened, shocked into silence again. People's eyes flicked from me to her, waiting for me to obey like I always had. I turned my head toward her slowly. She stood at the head table, her glass raised, her expression a mask of control. Her words weren't just for me, they were for the audience, to shame me back into my corner. For decades I had obeyed, I had swallowed every command, every dismissal. But not tonight. "No, Mother," I said, my grip tightening on the microphone the servers had left nearby. My hand trembled, but not with fear anymore, with resolve. "I've embarrassed myself long enough by staying quiet." Gasps again. A hush fell, deeper this time. Inside me, fear surged, threatening to break me down. But it melted quickly into something steadier. Defiance. I wasn't going back to my chair. Not now, not ever. Before the silence could stretch further, Odessa's voice rang out, smooth and dismissive. "Don't make this a scene, Aisling. You always want attention." The words landed like stones, drawing nervous laughter from a few tables. His smirk widened, and Rowena gave the smallest of nods beside him, her agreement clear even without words. I looked at him, my brother, dressed in the role of savior, shielded by a crown of lies. "Attention?" I echoed, steady but sharp. "If speaking the truth is attention-seeking, then I'll take every spotlight you've tried to steal from me." The audience stirred, whispers, shifting chairs, laughter that turned uneasy. Some guests leaned back uncomfortably, others crossed their arms, watching as if it were theater. "Enough," Odessa said with a condescending grin, as if his authority was final. "You're making yourself the punchline. I whispered to myself, not for them, not even for him, but as a promise. I am not their punchline tonight. The anger inside me crystallized, no longer wild but precise. They were uniting now. My mother's shame, my brother's mockery, my sister's quiet reinforcement, all to silence me. But I was no longer the girl they could push to the side of the photo, erase from the program, demote to a servant at their table. My eyes swept the crowd, searching for something, anything. That's when I saw him. A longtime family friend, a pastor who had known us since childhood, sat at a table near the front. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't laughing, he was simply watching. His hands folded over his glass, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my breath hitch. He didn't speak, didn't stand, but his silence wasn't the silence of dismissal, it was a silence of witness. He was bearing it, seeing it, weighing it. For a moment, the pressure grew heavier, knowing he was there, judging silently. But then I realized his gaze didn't weaken me. It steadied me. He was proof that this moment mattered, that someone outside of my immediate prison of family politics understood that what I was saying, what I was doing, carried truth worth hearing. I straightened, inhaling slowly, and let the strength seep back into my chest. I steadied my grip, steadied my voice, and prepared myself. This wasn't over, not even close. They thought their interruptions would cut me down. They thought their silence would bury me. But I felt it as sure as the blood rushing through my veins. The storm wasn't ending here. It was only beginning. I stepped forward, heels clicking against the polished floor, and mounted the small stage where my parents had stood moments earlier. The murmurs around me rose in pitch, surprise rippling through the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes followed me as I reached for the microphone the servers had forgotten to clear. My hand shook slightly, but I gripped it tight and lifted my chin. If I fall tonight, I thought, steadying my breath, I fall speaking. Gasps scattered when I faced the audience. Some guests whispered to one another, others leaned forward with a hunger for drama. A few looked alarmed, perhaps thinking security should step in, but no one moved. I was at the center for once, and I intended to use it. For years, I began, my tone calm but firm. You've heard one version of this family's story. Tonight, it's time you hear another. The room shifted again. Odessa's smile faltered, Rowena's eyes narrowed, and my mother's jaw locked. I could feel their fury pulsing toward me, but I buried my nerves under steel resolve. They say I contribute nothing, I said, letting the words roll slowly into the silence. Let's start with that lie. A hush swept the tables. Even the sound of glasses setting down stopped, as though the hall itself leaned in. For years, I continued, when bills came due, when emergencies struck, when tuition needed covering, who wrote the checks? Who kept the roof from caving in, the lights from shutting off? It wasn't Odessa, the so-called rock of this family. It wasn't Rowena with her perfect image. It was me. A murmur spread across the crowd, shock flickering in their faces. I raised my chin higher. I am the foundation they built their pride on. And yet they've never once admitted it. I paused, allowing the silence to thicken, then added, Sojourner Truth once said, truth is powerful and it prevails. Tonight, let's see if it does. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand hovering near his glass. My mother's lips tightened, her eyes blazing, but she said nothing. I inhaled slowly, my voice steady. Do you want specifics? I'll give you specifics. I turned toward my father first. When your medication cost more than your insurance would cover, who paid those bills? Who made sure you had what you needed, even when you told everyone it was your savings? Gasps. A ripple of whispers. Then I looked at Rowena. When Julia's tuition notice came, and you all claimed the funds were stretched too thin, who stepped in? Who signed the checks? Her face drained of color, her eyes darting around as if to find a defense. I pivoted to Odessa, whose smirk had vanished. And you? Do you remember the debts? The quiet phone calls, begging me not to let it get out that you were drowning financially. Who saved your reputation 3 different times? Who kept your house from foreclosure while you strutted around like a success? Odessa's hand tightened on his glass, his knuckles pale. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than denial. And here's the one you all should remember most. I spread my hands wide, sweeping across the hall. Tonight, this very banquet you're sitting in, eating from, drinking in, half of this was paid for with my money, and they let you believe it was their generosity. A collective gasp rose like a wave. People turned to one another, whispers flying like sparks. Is she serious? Could that be true? Did you know? I held their gaze, refusing to waver. My tone stayed factual, not hysterical. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a reckoning. Inside, a thought pressed firm. I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for recognition. The room rippled with shifting emotions. Some guests were visibly shaken, whispering fiercely at their tables. Others crossed their arms, skeptical, unwilling to believe the story they'd bought for years could collapse so quickly. A few, though, just a few, looked at me with something different. Sympathy, understanding, belief. I found strength in their faces. Not everyone was fooled. Not everyone was blind. I turned my eyes back to the head table. My parents' faces were rigid, frozen in practiced smiles that no longer held. My father's lips moved faintly, as though rehearsing excuses he couldn't yet speak. My mother's eyes flickered with denial, desperate to cling to the narrative unraveling before her. But I felt calm settle over me like armor. This stage, this night, this truth, it no longer belonged to them. This isn't your stage anymore, I thought, staring straight at my mother. It's mine. Whispers grew louder, filling the hall, but I knew whispers weren't enough. Tonight couldn't end in murmurs of doubt. Tonight had to end in proof, undeniable and absolute. I had cracked the shell, and now I was ready to break it wide open. My pulse hammered as I reached for my purse, the murmur of voices swelling around me like a storm ready to break. For a moment I thought about leaving it all unsaid, walking off that stage, letting the night fade back into polite lies. But I had crossed the point of no return. With deliberate care, I pulled out the envelope I had tucked away before coming. It was thick with folded papers, edges creased from my own trembling hands as I prepared them earlier. My mother's eyes narrowed instantly. Odessa leaned forward, frowning for the first time that night. If words aren't enough, I said, my voice sharper than I intended, then here's paper proof. I unfolded the first document and held it high so the nearest guests could see. This, I announced, is a bank transfer receipt. $15,000 wired directly to cover Odessa's debt, with his name right there in the memo line. The crowd gasped, whispers exploding at the tables. I laid down another sheet. Here are medical receipts for my father's prescriptions. Look closely, paid in full from my account, signed under my name. Another sheet, another truth unveiled. And these, tuition checks, Julia's schooling, funded not by parental savings as they bragged to you all, but by me. My signature is at the bottom. The murmurs turned into a low roar. A woman at the nearest table covered her mouth. A man leaned toward his wife, whispering, "She's showing the evidence. This isn't just talk." I gripped the microphone tighter. "They built a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the quake in my chest. "And I funded their reality." I drew in a breath and let the next blow fall. "Do you want something bigger?" I asked. "Fine. Even this banquet hall you're sitting in tonight, this reservation was made under my name, on my credit card, paid months in advance by me." Gasps erupted louder than before. Forks dropped, glasses clinked against tables. Guests twisted in their seats to look at my parents, searching for confirmation or denial. But I wasn't finished. I slid another paper free. "And this is proof of the Florida condo my parents claim they bought with hard-earned savings. The truth. I paid off the debts that would have taken it away. Without me, that home wouldn't exist under their name." The silence now was deafening. No one dared whisper. My mother's face tightened into a mask so brittle I thought it might shatter. My father slumped back in his chair, shoulders sagging, eyes fixed on the table as if he could vanish into it. Rowena's color drained, Odessa's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. The narrative they had spun so carefully, so proudly, was collapsing right there under the chandelier light, and I was the one tearing it down. For years, they had turned venues like this into stages for their version of the truth. Tonight, I had flipped the stage into mine. The shift in the crowd came slowly at first. Uneasy silence stretched, then waves of murmurs broke out. "Is it true?" One guest whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "She has the receipts," another replied. "I never knew," someone muttered from the back. A few exchanged looks of disbelief, struggling to reconcile what they'd believed with what was now undeniable. Others glared at my parents, their faces twisting with the disgust of betrayal. I scanned the head table again. Odessa avoided my gaze, staring at the floor. Rowena fidgeted, her hands twisting her napkin until it tore. My mother's glare drilled into me, daggers in her eyes, but still, she stayed speechless. And in their silence, I saw shame spreading, cracks widening. Inside me, satisfaction burned bright, but it was bittersweet. It shouldn't have taken this. Humiliation shouldn't be the price of being acknowledged. But here I was, and here they were, cornered by the very truth they had buried. I thought of a phrase I once heard an old mentor say: "Character is what you do when no one is watching." Tonight, everyone was watching, and their character was laid bare alongside my proof. The whispers grew louder, a wave that swelled until it filled the entire hall. Phones discreetly lifted, red lights blinking as recordings began. Reputations unraveled in real time. I gripped the microphone tighter and steadied myself. "I didn't just shatter their illusion," I said, my voice low but firm. "I gave the truth a microphone." Liberation washed through me, fierce and freeing, but so did dread. I knew the fallout would be brutal. Families like mine didn't crumble without taking someone down with them. This wouldn't end in applause. It wouldn't end in silence either. It would end in consequences, ruptures impossible to mend. The weight of that truth pressed heavy, even as relief coursed through me. I had detonated the image they worshipped, and there was no taking it back. And in the silence that finally fell after the murmurs ebbed, I knew this family would never look the same again. The silence that followed my revelations was a silence I had never heard before. It wasn't the polite pause after one of my mother's speeches. It was heavy, suffocating, charged with disbelief and shame. Faces turned not to my parents as they once would have, but to me, as if waiting for what came next. For the first time in decades, the center of the room was mine. Then my mother's voice cut through, sharp and poisonous. "You think money makes you important?" she spat, her eyes narrowing as though I were a stranger, not her daughter. "You're nothing without us. Nothing. Every so-called sacrifice you parade tonight, you did for yourself to feed your ego. You've always been selfish, Aisling." Gasps fluttered across the crowd. A few guests whispered harshly, "Did she really say that?" Others sat stunned, eyes wide. I gripped the microphone, my pulse steadying even as her words pierced. Inside, a truth rang clear. Even cornered, she spits venom instead of admitting the truth. And her cruelty, laid bare in front of 300 people, exposed the rot within our family more than any paper I held. "You raised me to believe family meant love," I answered calmly, though my voice trembled with restrained fury. "But what you meant was control, and when control slipped, you tried to cut me down. Not tonight." She opened her mouth again, but this time I didn't give her the chance. I reached into my purse one final time, pulling out a sealed envelope and a small set of keys. My movements were slow, deliberate. I walked to the head table, placed them firmly on the linen before my parents, and straightened. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is the last check you'll ever see from me." I pushed the keys toward them. "And these are the keys to a life you pretended was yours. That ends now." The hall froze, air thick with disbelief. For a beat, there was absolute silence. Then a wave of murmurs surged: shock, admiration, outrage, awe. Guests leaned toward one another. Did she just cut them off completely? She gave them everything, and now, look. I stepped back, voice low but clear. This isn't revenge, it's release. I'm done funding a lie. My mother's hand twitched toward the envelope, but she didn't touch it. My father stared at the keys, his face pale, shoulders slumped. The crown of control they had worn for decades slipped away with two simple objects on a white tablecloth. Before the room could swallow itself in whispers, a chair scraped loudly. A man stood, our longtime pastor, a family friend who had known us since I was a child. His presence drew immediate attention. People hushed instinctively. He cleared his throat, his eyes moving from me to my parents. "I cannot stay silent," he said firmly. His voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was sure. He pointed gently toward me. "She paid for my daughter's scholarship, quietly, humbly, without fanfare. When others turned away, she stepped in. She has given more to this family and to this community than you will ever admit." The hall erupted. Some clapped immediately, others gasped, still processing what they'd heard. A few glared at my parents, betrayal etched in their faces. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a strange mix of gratitude and sorrow. I wasn't alone in my truth anymore. Someone else had carried it into the open. For the first time, their narrative cracked beyond repair. It wasn't just me saying it. The truth had a second voice, and that made it undeniable. Applause began hesitantly, scattered across the room. A few stood, clapping slowly, uncertain. Then more followed, until a wave built, rising like a tide. In moments, the hall was filled with a standing ovation, echoing louder than the laughter that had once buried me. I stood motionless, my breath caught in my throat. My parents remained frozen, faces red, their reputations crumbling under the weight of the crowd's choice. Odessa stared at the floor. Rowena's lips trembled, torn between loyalty and shame. I looked out at the sea of people, their faces turned toward me, clapping, acknowledging. Tears welled in my eyes but did not fall. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, they saw me. Victory and loss tangled together in my chest. Empowerment laced with grief for the family I would never truly have. But in that moment, I understood something deeper. Dignity doesn't come from their recognition. It comes from standing tall when they try to bow your head. And tonight, I had stood. The thunderous ovation that had filled the banquet hall only moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. People lowered themselves back into their seats, murmurs rippling softly as they shifted silverware and glasses to disguise their unease. I stood there, still gripping the microphone, feeling the weight of both triumph and grief in my chest. For the crowd, the applause was closure, a performance worth remembering. But for us, for my family, it was only the beginning of the rupture. I glanced at my parents. My father's face was pale, drained of its usual practiced composure. My mother sat rigid, eyes cold, lips pressed into a line she couldn't soften anymore. Her humiliation was written in every frozen muscle of her expression. Around them, guests whispered to each other in tones that were no longer celebratory, but questioning, pitying. Admiration for me tangled with visible discomfort toward them. Applause ended, but the fracture remained, I thought bitterly. This victory wasn't clean. It came at the cost of exposing everything rotten, and though I had been vindicated, part of me still mourned the family I had once wished to have. It was my father who broke the silence first. His voice was softer than I had ever heard it, barely carrying over the tables. "She's right." Gasps cut through the hall. Forks clattered against plates. Odessa's head snapped toward him, eyes wide in disbelief. Rowena froze, her hand still resting on her wine glass, fingers trembling. My mother turned sharply, glaring at him as if his words were a betrayal deeper than mine. "She's right," he repeated, stronger this time, his gaze fixed not on them but on me. "All of it. We should have said it long ago." The air shifted again. Whispers turned into audible conversations, people processing, weighing, judging. Inside me, sorrow welled unexpectedly. It took this, public shame, a hall full of witnesses, for my father to finally speak the truth. His admission wasn't joyous to me. It was heavy, bittersweet. Why did it take decades of silence and one night of humiliation to get here? His words cracked the armor my family had built around themselves, but the timing left no room for celebration. Odessa shifted in his chair, lifting his glass to his lips, pretending to sip, though I saw his hand shake slightly. He refused to meet my eyes, his facade slipping for the first time. Rowena cleared her throat, her voice shaky. "You're misunderstanding," she tried, speaking to the guests rather than to me. "Families go through things. Sacrifices happen all the time. You can't take it all at face value." But the tremor in her words betrayed her. Her confidence, so polished moments earlier, faltered under the weight of evidence and our father's admission. I turned toward her, my tone calm, steady. "You never had to compete with me, Rowena. You invented a contest I never asked to play. All I ever wanted was to be seen for who I am, not as your shadow, not as the family's scapegoat." Her eyes glistened, and she looked down, unable to answer. Odessa still refused to look at me. The two of them, once the shining jewels of the family story, were crumbling under the truth that had finally cracked the surface. It wasn't triumph I felt, but resignation. They weren't ready to change. They were trapped in the roles our parents had handed them, crowns of false glory slipping from their heads as they scrambled to hold on to what was already gone. And then my mother spoke. Her voice, icy and unwavering, sliced through the room like a blade. "Families keep secrets," she declared, every word dripping with contempt. "And you destroyed ours. Do you feel proud now, Aisling? Exposing us like this? Betraying us in front of everyone?" Her eyes bore into me, a mixture of fury and desperation. I straightened my shoulders, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Truth isn't destruction. Lies are." The hall fell into silence again. No one dared interrupt. Guests sat still, torn between horror at her words and the quiet shock of mine. At that moment, I knew reconciliation would never come. She would never admit fault, never apologize, never see me beyond the role she had assigned. And for the first time, I felt strangely free of needing it. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. I will no longer seek their approval. That need, once so heavy, evaporated under the weight of everything exposed tonight. Sometimes peace isn't made at the table, I thought, looking around at the stunned faces. It's found by walking away. I turned slightly, preparing to leave the banquet hall, not as the forgotten youngest, not as the scapegoat, but as someone who finally chose herself. And with every step I imagined taking toward the door, I felt the weight begin to lift. But I also knew what I left behind could never be rebuilt. The applause still echoed faintly in my ears as I pushed open the heavy banquet doors and stepped into the cool December night. Behind me, the hall simmered with whispers, phones raised to capture the chaos my family could no longer contain. My heels clicked against the pavement, steady, certain, each step pulling me further from the suffocating air of that chandelier-lit room. For the first time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I wasn't skulking out with my head lowered, wishing I could disappear. I was leaving upright, spine straight, lungs filling with the night air that tasted cleaner than anything I had breathed inside. The doors thudded closed behind me, and I let them. That sound, final, echoing in the Florida night, wasn't just wood against metal. It was a chapter slamming shut. I looked up at the palm trees strung with Christmas lights, swaying lightly in the evening breeze. My chest rose and fell with a calm I had never known. This was the first breath of freedom. The peace didn't last long. Footsteps echoed behind me, sharp and hurried. Then her voice followed, venom sharpened by desperation. "You've ruined us," my mother hissed, clutching her shawl around her shoulders as though the night air itself had turned hostile. Odessa trailed her, face flushed with humiliation, while Rowena hovered behind, torn between loyalty and doubt. My father came last, his steps slow, his silence louder than any accusation. I turned, letting my gaze fall on each of them. For once, I didn't flinch. "No," I said evenly, my voice low but steady, slicing through the night. "You ruined yourselves the day you chose lies over love." Her eyes narrowed further, searching for a wound to strike, but I didn't give her the chance. I pivoted, walking toward my car parked at the edge of the lot. My keys jingled in my hand, the sound steady as a drumbeat. Rowena's voice wavered behind me. "Aisling, please, we can fix this." I didn't stop. You can fix nothing until you admit what you've done. And I know you never will. There was no begging left in me, no plea for acknowledgement. That part of me had died inside those banquet walls. I reached my car and turned back once more, not to them, but to the cluster of guests who had followed curiously outside. Their faces glowed under the parking lot lights, a mix of sympathy, shock, and awe. They had seen it all. I lifted my chin. This was my last gift to you. The truth. You'll never spend my money, my time, or my love again. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I cut across her with finality. Tonight wasn't betrayal. It was freedom. No one dared challenge me. Not Odessa, who looked at the asphalt as if it might swallow him whole. Not Rowena, who bit her lip until it bled. Not even my mother, who for all her venom had run out of poison worth spitting. The crowd stood frozen, breath held, watching a story end in the open air of a Florida parking lot. For decades, they had seen my family through the lens my parents crafted, perfect, unbreakable, untouchable. Tonight, I shattered it, not in rage, but in truth. The real mic drop moment wasn't on stage. It was here, outside, beneath the Florida sky, when I walked away for good. I slid into my car and started the engine. The headlights cut across the asphalt, painting my family in stark light one last time before I turned away. As the hall shrank in my rearview mirror, I let the silence wash over me. It wasn't the heavy silence of erasure. It was a lighter one, freedom's silence. Bittersweet, yes. The awareness stung that I might never reconcile with them. But the weight of needing to was gone. I whispered to myself, a truth I had carried all along. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just get freedom. The road stretched ahead, lined with palms, the air crisp against my skin through the cracked window. I imagined a life no longer defined by banquet halls or seating charts, by humiliations dressed as jokes. I pictured friends who felt like family, peace that couldn't be bought, dignity that could never again be stolen. They called me nothing, I murmured, pressing the accelerator as the hall vanished completely from sight. Tonight, I proved I was everything they feared, and more. Florida's night sky stretched above me, endless and free, and for the first time, so was I.